Hello and welcome to Factually. I'm Adam Conover. Thank you so much for joining me on the show again. You know, if you're like most Americans, you probably spent some time in a vehicle on the road today. You drove, or maybe you got a ride to work, school, or just about any other imaginable place. Roads are pretty much the most basic physical infrastructure that connects our society together. We even use roads as a measure of societal success and accomplishment, whether we're talking about Eisenhower's Interstate Highway Project back in the 50s or the glory of ancient Rome. For our world to work, we need roads, a lot of them. America itself has over 4 million miles of roads, and the vast majority of them were all built in the last century. And the world combined has 10 times that. We expect roads to be near to us, to be close at hand, to be in good condition, and if you live anywhere near a city, to be plentiful as hell. Because roads are so essential, though, we don't think much about their impact. It's easy to imagine roads as something that exists on top of the world, right? Something somehow separate from it. But that is absolutely not the case. Roads cut right through habitats, geographies, cities, and ecosystems. What for us is a convenience and a God-given right is for a mountain lion or a deer an obstruction, a wasteland, or a potential death sentence. For animals, the ones that are still left on this planet, roads are a drastic and dangerous transformation of the world around them. And we now know that roads have a massively negative environmental impact. We think of roads as connecting, but we don't think enough about what they cut off, not just for animals, but for human society as well. So, just what is the impact of roads on our planet and on our lives as humans? And is there anything we can do about it? Well, to answer that question, we have an amazing guest today. But before we get to him, I want to remind you that if you want to support this show, you can do so on Patreon. Just head to patreon.com/Adam Conover. $5 a month gets you every episode of this podcast ad-free and a bunch of other awesome perks as well. And if you want to come see me on tour as a stand-up comedian, head to adamconover.net. I'd love to see you at an upcoming stand-up show. I'm touring all around the country, new dates added all the time. Now, this week on the show, we have an incredible guest. His name is Ben Goldfarb, and he's the author of a new book called Crossings: How Road Ecology is Shaping the Future of Our Planet. Please welcome Ben Goldfarb. Ben, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so you have a book. The thesis of the book is that roads, the very thing I used to get to the studio today, are bad. What the fuck and why?
Yeah, driving ruins everything. That could be the subtitle of the book. Roads we think of as being these sort of symbols of freedom and connectivity. We all love going on road trips and getting places in our car. Roads are so useful, right? But the thesis of the book is basically that for all of the non-human animals out there, the deer and the raccoons and the opossums, everything that's basically not us, roads are this ecological debacle on a truly massive scale.
And how so? Why is that? I mean, it's just like a little strip of asphalt. What's the big deal?
Yeah, I mean, certainly like the most conspicuous manifestation of how roads screw up nature is roadkill, right? We've all seen the dead critter lying by the side of the highway. And I think that we kind of tend to dismiss roadkill as being a real biological crisis, but more than 1 million animals are killed in the US every day by cars, and roads are an existential threat to all kinds of critters like the Florida panther and the tiger salamander, right? So roadkill, this incredibly mundane phenomenon that we all drive by 1 million times a day without thinking about it, is really one of the great ecological catastrophes on our planet. It's one of the causes of the sixth extinction event that we're all living through right now.
I mean, I wouldn't have imagined the numbers would be that large, right, of roadkill, but I mean, I suppose it makes sense. I mean, you've got this strip in what was previously in many areas a forest where suddenly there's incredibly large metal objects moving through at a very high rate of speed. It's very dangerous, and it's not something that animals, I guess, evolved to be aware of, right?
Well, right. That's exactly the problem, is the way that cars kind of hijack evolutionary history. You think about all of the common critters that we have in North America, the porcupines, which have quills, and skunks, which spray, and opossums that play possum, and snakes that use their venom defensively, right? It's like these are all these good kind of stand your ground strategies that work really well against a coyote or a hawk or some natural predator. But, when you've got, an F-150 barreling down I-70 at 80 miles an hour, the worst thing you can possibly do is stand your ground, right? So all of this, the cars basically take evolution and render it maladaptive. I think that's one of the really kind of horrific and tragic things about cars.
And cars have not been around that long, less than 100 years have we been driving at that rate of speed. And so there hasn't been time for evolution to evolve anything to compensate for that. Like, I'm kind of having fun imagining what an evolutionary adaptation to traffic would be. Like, I don't know, maybe you could inflate or or I don't know, move across the road very quickly, I suppose.
Yeah,
or
jump really far or something. Yeah.
Yeah, or maybe resemble a car coming in the opposite direction to cause the driver to swerve, right? If you could like have two headlights pop out and a sort of whatever mimicry move,
Yeah,
but that would take a couple million years.
Right. Yeah, although there actually is one really cool study about road driven evolution. There's this fantastic paper about swallows, cliff swallows that build those little mud nests on the undersides of highway bridges and overpasses. Maybe you've seen the swallows flying around. And basically what researchers found is that, over the course of just a few decades, so really like the geologic blink of an eye, cliff swallows have actually evolved to get shorter wings. And the reason for that is that if you have long wings, that's good for flying long directions in straight lines. But if you have short wings, that's good for making lots of tight turns and rolls. It's good for that maneuverability that you'd use to get out of the way of an 18-wheeler, barreling down the highway. So as a result, all of the long-winged swallows are getting weeded out of the population by vehicles, and the short-winged swallows are being selectively favored. So evolution is actually happening really rapidly because of our roads, which is pretty amazing to think about.
Okay, that's a very quick evolutionary adaptation, but most animals are not going to have that opportunity. It normally takes, thousands or millions of years to evolve something as complex as venom or a startle, stand your ground response, right?
Totally, yeah. The cliff swallows are definitely the exception, not the norm. And most animals just are not able to cope with vehicles, which is a huge part of why they're so destructive. Definitely.
Okay, but look, I think if you're coming on here to say, hey, roadkill is bad, people will say, yes, I agree. But come on, it's a small strip, right? There are still many, millions of acres of wild places here in America, especially if you go to, I don't know, states like Montana or even many parts of California. I fly a lot. You look down, you see one little road going all the way across the desert with miles and miles of desert on either side, right? And so how bad could this problem really be on a large scale?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think that one of the things that people fail to realize that you certainly don't notice when you're just looking down at a road from above is, roads, despite being these little slender asphalt ribbons, are actually huge forms of habitat loss, right? You can you could imagine a herd of migrating elk or antelope, these animals that have to move across large landscapes to find food and water and shelter and all the stuff they need, just like people, right? And when they hit, an interstate like I-70 or I-80 or I-90, there's this kind of constant stream of traffic driving along, this phenomenon that some biologists have called the moving fence, just this impenetrable wall of traffic. And animals are reluctant to try to break through that wall, right? Nobody wants to, dart across, a 200-foot wide interstate highway that's trafficked by 20,000 cars a day, right? So when animals fail to even attempt to cross the highway, they're losing access to all of that habitat that they need to survive. So they're actually—
It's a wall.
It's a wall, exactly. It's a wall of vehicles. And, there are some really horrific stories of, after the interstate highways were built, of these big herds of deer and elk and other migrating animals that actually starve en masse because they have to kind of keep going to get to their, low elevation winter pasture where they can find food, in the snowy months. but they hit that wall of traffic and they don't try to cross, and they just end up dying as a result. So the road's not killing them directly, right? It's the habitat loss that's caused by the road that's the big problem.
Right. If you take a large habitat, a large plains that a group of animals might use, and you just put one road across the middle, you've taken away half of the habitat for those animals if they're stuck on land, if that's the only way to move across, because you've divided it into two. And also, you mentioned the sixth extinction. I read Elizabeth Kolbert's book a number of years ago, incredible book, and she talks about how humans doing that to animal habitats, subdividing them or connecting habitats that didn't exist, that weren't connected before, like, is just generally numerically reduces biodiversity on a massive scale. Is there an impact here as well?
Oh, I mean, a huge one. Yeah. I think that fragmentation of habitats, which roads really inflict is one of the huge contributors to this, massive extinction event that we're living through. Right. And it's not just those migrating animals. You could imagine, a big critter like a mountain lion or a grizzly bear, right? These are big animals that need lots of prey, and they patrol huge territories, and they have to wander these enormous swaths of intact habitat, right? So if you get a bunch of highways that fragment that habitat and prevent them from seamlessly moving across the landscape, I mean that's potentially fatal to them. There are some horrific cases of populations of mountain lions, for example, that have become inbred because no new mountain lions can enter the population, and none of the mountain lions in the population can leave because they're on these little islands of habitat surrounded by oceans of freeways, and they have to end up mating with their own daughters and granddaughters and great granddaughters. So the population gets super inbred and declines over time. So yeah, no question that that roads are, even when they're not killing animals directly in the form of roadkill, right, they're still preventing critters from getting to the places they need to go, and curtailing their lives as a result.
And it's so striking that what for us is a form of connection and convenience, right? It allows, for instance, for an isolated population of humans, a road might allow more diversity, right? It might allow people to come in and go, might allow that date who you've never met before, that sex partner who is not from your town and came from the big city, could bring a little bit of, a new, to your, a little bit of a spice to your footloose town, right? That's what a road represents to humans. To animals, it represents, like, it can create separation and isolation and deprivation. You mentioned mountain lions. There's a really great example of that here in LA where I live. Famously, I'm sure you know this story, there's a mountain lion named P22 who crossed multiple freeways to cross the Santa Monica. The normal range of these mountain lions would be the Santa Monica Mountains, which are now subdivided by freeways. This one mountain lion crossed multiple freeways to enter Griffith Park, which is the biggest urban park in LA. It's a big mountainside, and lived there for, I believe, over a decade, just eating, like, I don't know, rats and bunnies and and things like that, but became sort of a symbol of the city, very beloved resident. People would be very excited when they saw P22, except that it was fundamentally sad because he had no mate. He had no ability to sort of have a full mountain lion life. He was essentially, like, almost rendered into a zoo animal, and eventually died when he was hit by a car and was injured. And I'm sorry to end the story on a down note, but it was just such a it was like it was a very traumatic event for the city when this happened because he was so beloved. It's real what you're talking about.
Yeah, totally. I'm glad you mentioned P22 because he is kind of the ultimate symbol or avatar of the problems that roads create. And I think that one of the great things about him too is that he's also part of the solution, right? That he raised so much awareness about the plight of these mountain lions that you're describing, that now California is in the process of building this gigantic wildlife overpass over the 101 that will allow those that little inbred cluster of Santa Monica mountain lions to disperse out, and will allow new lions from elsewhere in California to disperse into that little island of habitat. It'll encourage that kind of genetic interchange that Santa Monica population needs to survive in the long term. And certainly that incredible bridge that's being built right now wouldn't have happened without P22 galvanizing the city and raising awareness about the fate of these animals. So P22, he definitely suffered an awful end, but he kind of died a martyr. Adam,
Yeah.
the rest of his family is ultimately going to benefit from his sacrifice to lion kind.
I mean, there are murals of this mountain lion all over Los Angeles. It is, such a beloved story and a beloved figure. And I didn't realize they actually are building that wildlife corridor. I knew there was plans to, but it's under construction now?
It's under construction now. It'll be completed by 2025.
What is that going to look like? Like, just paint a picture for us of what that is.
Yeah, it's a really amazing structure. It's almost calling it a bridge is, I think, kind of a misnomer, because it's really going to be this. I mean, one planner described it as architecturally solid terrain through which the highway must pass. It's basically this brand new ecosystem, almost as wide as it is long, that's going to have shrubs and chaparral and oak trees and all kinds of little habitat features on it. Because mountain lions, yes, they're sort of the symbol of the divisiveness of the 101, this giant freeway, but they're also coyotes and deer and bobcats and lizards and birds and insects, right? There are all of these other species that are also suffering due to the division and the fragmentation created by the freeway. And the designers and the landscape architects who are building this thing have to think about all of those different animals, right, and create the habitat features that they all need, whether that's little log jams for rodents, or rock piles for snakes, or or oak woodlands for deer. You have to think about the entire ecosystem. So it's really going to be this whole new chunk of land that's going to span the 101. It's incredibly exciting.
And do we think that animals are actually going to be able to use this? Because I imagine, these are not people, right? They're smart and they're adaptable, but are they going to realize, hey, if I want to cross this thing, I got to go a mile south, because that's where the crossing is,
Yeah, I think so. It's one of the really important pieces of this whole construction, and this is true of any wildlife crossing, is you have these roadside fences that kind of lead the animals to the crossing, right? So if you're a mountain lion and you're looking to disperse into a new habitat, you're wandering along, you reach the 101, and then you hit a fence, and you turn right and you follow the fence line looking for a way across, and then suddenly here's this amazing bridge that you can use, right? So the animals don't necessarily know to use the structure unless you've got the fences along the road that kind of direct them or funnel them to the crossing.
Ah, I see. So we're sort of inclining them. Hey, if you go this way, maybe there'll be some nice stuff down there, and they can sort of follow the path, kind of like wayfinding at an airport. Just go this way. We're just going to let you know if you go this way, you'll get to the right spot. But look, that's one project, I assume, constructed at the cost of many millions of dollars because of one celebrity mountain lion. Are projects like that really capable of addressing the scale of this problem? And by the way, this is just one of the problems with the roads. We haven't even gotten into the others.
Yeah. It's an awesome question, Adam. I mean, I think that look, certainly we know that these projects are broadly good, right? But there have been several thousand of them built in the U.S. and and many thousands more in Europe and other places. And we know that they work in reducing roadkill, in many cases dramatically, by more than 90%, and helping animals get to the places they need to get to, right? So we know that these wildlife crossings are good. They often actually pay for themselves by preventing lots of dangerous crashes, right? You can imagine that when you hit a deer,
they're good for like motorist safety as well.
They're good for motorist safety, right? Like when you hit a deer, that messes your shit up, right?
Of course, yes.
You're right. You've got the hospital bills if you're injured. You've got the vehicle repairs, the insurance costs, the tow trucks. The average deer collision costs more than $9,000, and all of these different expenses. So if you can build these wildlife crossings with the fences that prevent those dangerous crashes, those dangerous and expensive crashes, you could actually save a lot of money in the long run, right? So we know that these things are good, but at the same time, as you're alluding to, I think we can't build them everywhere, right? There's just so many thousands of of places out there where where roadkill's an issue. I mean, certainly wildlife crossings, they're better than not having them. Absolutely, they work, but they don't exactly cure all of the problems that our obsessive car culture creates in this country. That's for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we get to what those actual solutions might be or those broader solutions, let's talk about more of the problems. I like problems more than solutions almost. They're more fun to talk about. We've talked about animals that are crossing by land, getting hit by cars. What about birds? I mean, birds can fly right over. Do birds have problem with roads as well?
Yeah, birds get hit all the time. Unfortunately, I hit an owl
man.
a few weeks ago. Yeah, nothing.
You hit an owl,
safe, dude. I hit an owl. Yeah, I was pretty traumatized by it.
You wrote this book and you hit an owl.
I hit an owl the week that the book came out. That's one of my great shames.
A wise owl full of knowledge about what we could be doing better, and you killed it with your Chevy Tahoe, or what was it?
He wasn't that wise, clearly, Adam. If he swooped in front of my Subaru Crosstrek.
A Subaru. All right, and you think you're all earthy, crunchy with the Subaru, and here you are murdering owls. Okay.
Yeah, well, I didn't feel great about it. Well, now that I've confessed my sins, what was the last animal that you hit, Adam? Yeah, you sure?
I don't drive.
You have something.
I famously don't drive. No.
Although I didn't know that about you. Okay.
No, I don't drive.
You're a better man than me.
But the bus I rode probably has hit a lot of finches, I would imagine, and a couple pigeons. Yeah. So I'm not blameless, right? And by the way, a lot of shit comes to me just because I don't drive doesn't mean like I'm not benefiting from roads. Like all my packages come on roads. You know what I mean? Like it's roads everywhere, man. You don't get to opt out of using roads.
Yeah, those are blood packages, dude. Yeah.
Okay, we're all sinners here. We can all admit it.
We're all, totally, yeah.
And we'll all go home and pray to the owls that we murdered every single night. What kind of owl was it?
I don't know. I couldn't find him. It all happened so fast,
How did you know it was an owl? Was it like, did you hear like a whoop, like right before the splat?
I did not hear a doomed final hoot, but it was just I'm sort of inferring it was a very large bird flying at night. I think it was probably an owl.
Yeah.
Anyway, you were asking about birds before I just took the opportunity to confess my sins for no reason.
And I'm so glad that you did.
Yeah, no, you're sort of like a priest. You're taking my road.
That's what people come here to do, man. That's what the show's all about. This is where we're really honest and we confess what animals we murdered. So, but back onto birds.
Right. Yeah. So one of the big problems that roads cause that I think we don't really think about is road noise pollution, right? That's a really big one. You've got the engine noise, you've got the tire noise. Actually, most of what you're hearing when you hear an interstate kind of hissing along, that's actually mostly tire noise, not the engine, right? So electric vehicles are not going to save us from all of that road noise. And you think about the owl that I unfortunately hit. That's an animal with incredibly keen hearing, right? An animal that makes its living with its hearing. It has to listen for the little creeping footsteps of a mouse or a vole in the underbrush, right? And if you have this half-mile wide strip of noise pollution created by the highway, that's functionally a half mile of habitat loss, right? If the owl can't hear that mouse because the sound is drowned out by engine and tire noise, the owl can't live there, right? So again, we return to this idea of the road as being this, super narrow strip, and yet that kind of noise envelope can be, a couple miles wide, and it's affecting, every critter within its purview.
Right. I think we've all had the experience of going on a hike in a place where you're like, what a wonderful natural habitat, and you're enjoying getting out there in nature, like everything is so fresh and peaceful, and then things get really quiet and you're like, I can hear the road. I can hear it. It's like it's just over there, and maybe it's a mile away, you can still hear it. And the sonic landscape is something that animals actually use to navigate, right?
Totally. Yeah. It's really challenging. And there's this great study, this experiment that I write about in the book called the Phantom Road. And, basically what researchers did is they recorded the sound of traffic, and then they played the sound of traffic through speakers in this roadless area. So there's no physical road, just the noise
Yeah.
pollution of the road. And they found that, all of these birds avoided that area, and the birds who stuck around actually were in worse shape. So the reason for that is that if you're a little, like, imagine being a little sparrow, and you get eaten by everything, right? Hawks and falcons and foxes and bobcats and all kinds of other critters, and you're constantly just listening for the flap of a hawk's wings or the sound of that fox creeping through the brush, right? But again, if those acoustic signals are drowned out by all of that road noise, you have to look around for predators constantly instead of listening for them. And every second that you're looking around is a second that you're not eating,
Ah,
berries or insects or whatever you eat, right? So the birds in this case, all of these little migratory songbirds that need to put on fat to complete these multi-thousand-mile journeys, they were they basically lost weight and they were less fit to migrate because
wow.
the noise of that road just masked their predators, and they were sort of constantly vigilant as a result.
That's really, I mean, it's a really cool finding, but can we admit that, like, sometimes, like, scientists, their plans for studies are like kind of lazy and obvious, you know what I mean? Like, we went and we played loud sound in the forest and the birds left. Like, oh yeah, I went to a library and I put on a Motorhead album on a boombox and everyone yelled at me. Like, it's a very obvious, it's like, yeah, of course they don't like the sound, but I guess it sort of illuminates something that we don't often think about, which is that really powerful effect. And I know that that amount of sound it's rare now to even find a place that it does not have human sound coming somewhere. I forget the name of it. I read an article years ago about a guy who does field recordings, and one of his goals is to go to different places in the natural. Maybe you know his name. Different places in the natural world where there is no human sound, and just record the sounds there, because these are like endangered soundscapes. Because almost anywhere that you go, you will eventually hear, if you don't hear a road, you'll eventually hear a plane or some other sort of human sound. And when you think about the number of uses that animals use it for, finding each other, communicating with each other, listening for prey, listening for predators, all those sorts of things, it's like it's we're taking away one of their senses.
Yeah, no question. And I mean, silence is sort of this scarce and endangered resource, right? And it's not just wild animals. It's us too. I
Mm.
think we're so kind of awash in road noise that we don't really notice it. And yet road noise it's elevating our blood pressures, our stress levels. It's making us more susceptible to cardiac disease and stroke and diabetes and all of these other maladies. I mean, it's literally taking years off of our lives. There was this really just heartbreaking, shocking study. It's set in Paris, where they basically, researchers basically compared people living in the noisiest neighborhoods to people living in the quietest neighborhoods. And the people in the noisiest neighborhoods lived 3 years less than the people in the quiet neighborhoods, right? So,
Wow.
so noise alone, and most of that is road noise, is again, it's literally taking years off of our lives. And as I was writing this book, my wife and I we were living, in a pretty noisy neighborhood in Eastern Washington. We were in this busy arterial, next to I-90. We were in a pretty loud environment, and I was sort of reading all of this noise pollution literature, and it was like, holy shit! I mean, this is literally killing us. So we ended up, moving, and now we live on a little quiet street in the middle of nowhere. Thanks in part, I think, to this realization that road noise is
Yeah.
a killer of humans.
And how do you get to that quiet street? A road
Oh,
on
I
which you
drive.
kill
I drive
owls.
to it. Yeah, yeah. Adam,
Well, look.
I'm so impressed that you're a non-driver, dude. I'm really I'm full of
Oh my.
admiration. I didn't know that about you.
No, 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 no. It's because I'm a coward and I have bad eyesight. I don't like doing it. And, I mean, I take my fair share of Ubers, right? Because that's I take public transportation as much as I can. I'm still using the system as much as anybody else. It's a choice that makes me more comfortable. It's not one that, I can even urge upon other people, nor do I think it's sufficient to solve the problem. But I want to talk more about how roads affect us as people, not just wildlife. But we got to take a really quick break. We'll be right back with more Ben Goldfarb. Folks, let me tell you a little story. A couple years ago, I started getting weird phone calls in the middle of the night from prank callers who knew my name. And I was like, where did they get my information? Turns out there are these sites called data brokers that collect everybody's personal information, your address, your phone number, and makes it available to anyone who wants to buy it for a fee. And I was like, that's bad. I don't want that information out there. So I signed up for a service called Delete Me that scours the internet to find that data and take it down. It worked great. And I am so happy that they are sponsoring the show today because I can unreservedly endorse their service. Here's how it works. Delete Me's team of experts scans the internet to find and delete your personal data, and they get you a detailed report of their findings within 7 days. And this is so key because we live in an era of doxing, online harassment, and ID theft that can compromise not just your finances, but potentially even ruin job opportunities. And about 41% of Americans are exposed to some form of online harassment. So if you want to safeguard yourself from those bad guys and live with the peace of mind that experts are hunting down and removing your personal information from the internet every 3 months, then check out Delete Me. Go to joindeleteme.com/Adam and get 20% off all consumer plans with the code ADAM. So we're back with Ben Goldfarb. We've been talking about how roads impact the environment so profoundly, way out of proportion to what you might think based on, our sort of limited experience with them. And there's a contrast there, what hurts the environment versus what helps humans. I want to talk more about the ways that roads hurt humans, though. We just talked about noise pollution, how that's bad for our health. What about regular pollution? I mean, I read a couple years ago, there was a study, and I'm not going to know the numbers, but there was a study that living close to a freeway was very bad for your health, and that, the study sort of recommended homes should not be built this distance from freeways within, however many feet or a quarter mile, something like that. And then the study went on to say that, in fact, most homes in Los Angeles are built that exact distance from a freeway, or most people who live in Los Angeles. So are living within the danger zone that this very study said you should not live within. So, and that's because of particulate, I assume pollution. You know it better than I. Like, how bad is that problem?
Yeah, it's a huge public health crisis, no doubt about it. Certainly you see really high rates of asthma and heart disease and cancer, living in close proximity to the major highways. And a lot of that is certainly due to those particulate pollutions that you're talking about. I think it's important to note as well that look, roads affect all of us in some way or another. We think about them as these emblems of human freedom. And yet, try getting around, Dallas or Raleigh or, LA without one, right? They're also impinging on our own lives in all kinds of ways, but, they're not affecting us all equally. I think that's another really important thing too, is that, when you look at rates of who lives close to freeways, you see that it's disproportionately communities of color. It's
right.
African Americans and Latinos and Asians. It's generally sort of disadvantaged people who are sort of forced into these really dangerous and unhealthy living situations, and that's very much a kind of a deliberate artifact of history. It was those urban freeways that were built through all of these American cities, Miami, Minneapolis, Syracuse, basically as a way of, wiping out these communities of color, these neighborhoods of color that, white urban planners considered slums. So let's just take, I-81 or I-5 or, you name the freeway, and we'll just plow it through one of these neighborhoods and wipe it out. So the fact that communities of color are sort of disproportionately affected by roads today, that's very much the legacy of 70 years of kind of infrastructural racism.
Yes, and for those communities, those roads do exactly the same thing to humans that we're doing to the natural world, where they divide the habitat in half. I read a number of years ago when I lived in New York, The Power Broker, the famous biography of Robert Moses by Robert Caro, one of the most incredible books you could read if you like history and biography. But it talks about how Moses drove freeways right through existing neighborhoods. And so imagine if you lived in what was previously a walkable neighborhood, you walk to work, you walk to the store, you've got your neighbors, etc. And suddenly there's a freeway going through your neighborhood that you either have to go under an underpass where it's all dark and scary, or you have to walk over an overpass like a little pedestrian bridge. Suddenly you are cut off from your own neighborhood. You used to live in a walkable sort of human environment. Now you live on the side of a wall full of like you say, a moving fence going 80 miles an hour that is loud and noisy and polluting you and cuts you off from your neighbors. That happened to millions and millions of Americans.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the places that I went working on this book was Syracuse, where I-81 was the freeway that was just punched right through the middle of the city, again, in a very deliberate way, sort of targeting this vibrant African American community that, to the city's planners looked like a slum because it had black people in it. And there, I mean, what happened, there's sort of the initial displacement caused by the freeway, but then there was, decades afterwards of this sort of slow motion decay of neighborhoods, where people could not reach businesses, grocery stores and dry cleaners and churches and each other, and so you've got the sort of the immediate trauma of the freeway being built, and then you've got decades and decades subsequently of this kind of slow motion deterioration, and now Syracuse is one of the most segregated cities in the country, in large measure because this freeway just kind of plowed through the middle of it. But they're actually in the very gradual process of removing that viaduct,
wow,
that big elevated section of freeway. They're in the kind of the planning process right now. And the long-term plan is to tear that down and replace it with this sort of street level boulevard known as the community grid that's going to have houses and businesses and hopefully restore some of that vibrant urban life to this impacted neighborhood. So just because we made these infrastructural mistakes decades ago doesn't mean that we can't rectify some of those errors today.
I mean, we just so rarely think about, as I said at the beginning, even though that roads connect us, they also separate us. That, the bigger a road is, the more cars can move on it. Well, the more people it connects across long distances, but the more it separates someone standing on one corner from the opposite corner, right? That like, if you want to cross a slow moving city street, hey, you can probably step out into the street and just like, oh, your friend's across there. Oh, hey, how's it going? Just step, look both ways and walk. But if you're trying to cross an 8-lane road, you might as well be looking across the Grand Canyon. Like you have to wait for your little prescribed moment of time, your 20 seconds that you get every 5 minutes that it's going to be safe for you to cross. If you're lucky, it'll be safe. And the fact that we have subdivided our entire world, with these chasms, these trenches of cars, these walls of cars that make it harder for us to move around is just, we almost never think about it. How did we get ourselves into this fix where, 100 years ago, right, we hadn't, that's not what roads were to us, now they are. How do we get ourselves into this situation? How do we make this infrastructural mistake?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that one of the ironic things about the history of cars and roads, right, is that we think of America as having this love affair with the automobile, right? That's a term that you hear
right.
thrown around all the time, right? As though we love these things because they permit us freedom and mobility and so on. But when the car first proliferated on American landscapes, we freaking hated them, right? And this is something that the historian Peter Norton has written about a lot. The fact that when cars first enter civic life, there are these giant safety parades, where all of these children and mothers are out in the streets protesting against this dangerous new, usurper that's taking over, urban life. And early cars were, they were incredibly, they're still, of course, incredibly dangerous, but, at the time, per capita pedestrian death rates were even higher. Nobody knew how to drive. There were no signs. There were no safety features. These things were incredibly dangerous. So people hated the car. The car was also, it was the tool of the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers, right? That was sort of who could afford
Right.
early cars. It was the sort of the hoi polloi.
It was the rich person's murder machine. They would
exactly. It was a rich person's murder machine. Yeah,
some rich guy fucking barreled through my working class neighborhood at 50 miles an hour and killed my son on his way to the child labor factory. And now we lost a source of income and our beautiful little boy. People were pissed about it.
Exactly. Yeah. And one of the fascinating things that, I did in this book was just, try to sort of read about the early history of roadkill as well. Right. And one of the fascinating things is that, like, the early biologists, who go out in the 1920s to count dead woodpeckers and garter snakes and ground squirrels, they're all thinking about roadkill in exactly those terms. They're like, hey, they're destroying American cities. They're killing our child on the way to the child labor factory, and they're also killing woodchucks and and porcupines and all kinds of other critters as well. So it's this sort of concern about animals and nature emerges, I think, from this concern about cars' impacts on humans. And then what happens is basically that the car wins, right? I mean, the car has really good lobbyists. They're the car companies, they're the oil companies, they're the contractors who are building roads. There's the federal government itself. The Bureau of Public Roads, and all of this sort of popular dissent, both about pedestrian deaths and about wild animal deaths, all kind of gets like swept under the rug by this incredibly powerful automotive lobby.
And we still have those lobbies today. I mean, if you look at, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is one of the biggest infrastructure bills we've had in a generation, that's like going to create all these, new green initiatives. Well, a big part of it is the biggest investment in the green transition is for electric cars, right? Which are going to drive on roads. Like, we are not investing in trains or other systems of transportation that can move more people more efficiently using less space with less destruction. We are doubling and tripling down on roads. We're just changing the engine that's in the vehicle. And I mean, are we perpetuating the same mistake?
I think in a lot of ways, yeah. I think that often when we think about when the general public thinks about the environmental impacts of transportation, they think about the carbon emissions, right? The contribution of cars to climate change, and that's certainly that's a big thing, right? Transportation, I think, is something like a quarter of our country's carbon footprint. So certainly, cars are a big contributor to climate change. But it's not as though you can just go from an internal combustion engine to a battery and suddenly our transportation infrastructure is ecologically benign, right? I mean, those electric vehicles are not going to do anything about the problems we've been discussing: the roadkill, the barriers to migration, the road noise problem, the road salt problem. Road salt is turning all of our rivers and lakes into brackish estuaries. You've got tire particles that are killing salmon in some cases, right? You've got this whole suite of ecological problems that cars cause, and again, as you say, changing from a conventional engine to a battery is not going to solve any of those problems, right? So I think that's a lot of what my book's about ultimately is that, look, climate change is part of the ecological problem of transportation, but it's by no means the only one. And you could even imagine a world in which electrification makes some of those problems worse, right? Once it's when it's cheaper to drive because you're just plugging your car into the grid rather than filling up your gas tank, you drive more, and more driving means more of all of the problems we've been talking about. So anyway, yeah, this episode is basically Adam ruins your road trip because.
I mean, so what do we do about this? Because when we talk about it on that scale, it seems like part of the problem here is the problem of humanity, that we have an impact no matter what we do. I mean, I remember reading years ago, I think we actually covered this on Adam Ruins Everything, that even the act of creating a path in a natural wilderness, just people walking from one place to another, has some of the effects that you're talking about, where it creates a wildlife dead zone. Animals don't want to go there because they can tell some large mammals have been walking around, and that's just what humans, 10,000 years ago, that's what humans were doing, was creating a path from one place to another. And once we had those paths, of course, we naturally wanted more efficient ways to go from one place to another. Bad roads were a curse in America before we had the interstate. We had gravel roads everywhere. It was like one of the most important infrastructure projects to improving human life in this country was reforming our roads, paving them, like it improved people's lives. And I think about, I have a very good friend of mine bought some land in Joshua Tree out in the desert. He built a home out in the desert. The very first thing he had to do was build a road to the property so he could get there. He rented a bulldozer. He had a lot of fun building his own road. He probably knows more about roads than you do, or at least he has some hands-on experience because he built one himself, right? So this is to some degree, creating an efficient corridor for movement is just part of what humans do on this planet. So are we just cursed to always have this effect on the world around us, or is there something that we can actually do about it?
That's a good and big question that I don't really have a great answer to. I mean, I think that, look, certainly, giving people more transportation options is really important, right? Creating better transit systems that get people out of their cars, is really, really vital, and that applies in sort of in many different contexts. You've got, certainly that's, something you can do in a city, and many cities are, engaged in that work of, improving transportation options. But, you could also imagine, doing that in a protected area like a national park, right? We have parks now like Denali National Park and Zion National Park and Glacier, where the private vehicle, the personal car, the symbol of the American road trip is basically forbidden, and you have to, get on a bus like a damn European, and experience the landscape that way. I think that's an important point, right? Is that yes, we as humans, we are this road building species. We're an infrastructure species, but it's not always the road itself that's the really catastrophic thing. It's the traffic that drives on the road, right? And if you can,
yes,
if you can reduce that traffic dramatically by consolidating people in a single bus rather than having them all strung out in their personal vehicles, right? That's a huge improvement for nature in a lot of ways, and it gives you options too. Like in Denali, where they have this wonderful bus system. They operate the bus system in such a way that there have to be gaps between the buses for animals to migrate, right? And that's something that you can't really do that, if you have 100,000 people in 100,000 personal vehicles, right? That's
yes.
That's the kind of thing you can do when you have a mass transportation system. So, getting people out of their cars, I think, however you accomplish that, is one of the most important things we can do for this planet.
It makes me think again about Griffith Park in the city where I live, Los Angeles, one of the big tourist attractions here. There's an observatory at the top people like to go to, but how people get there is they drive. There's a road through the park all the way to the top, and every single time you go to this park, you know what there is? Traffic in the park. Yeah. People bumper to bumper driving to the top so they can get out and walk around a little bit. And every couple of years, someone has a plan of, let's build what they have in other cities. Let's have a gondola or a funicular or something that'll get people up to the top of this park. And a lot of the neighbors say, no, that's going to destroy the park. It's a wild, natural place. There is a road in the park. We have a road in the park right now. What if we got rid of the road, turned that into a walking path or a natural habitat, and then had some sort of mass transportation up to the top? We would have a more vibrant, verdant park with more space for wildlife in it. So along those lines, if you could make some policy prescriptions for the next 100 years of transportation or roads in America, right? What would you suggest in terms of making sure that we aren't perpetuating these problems? Is there a better way to organize our transportation? What is it?
Yeah, good. That's another really good and big and difficult question. And
we're going to end on it, and so you better have a good answer.
Gosh. All right. Well, I'll do my best. Look, certainly there's no silver bullet, right? You think about okay, a city like Los Angeles, I mean, certainly, increasing public transit options is really important. Getting people out of cars is vital. But then I think about where I live. I live in rural Colorado, and it's sort of hard to imagine. Yes, okay, you could potentially imagine better bus service here, but it's also really hard to, like, we just don't have a dense enough population for public transit to really be widely adopted. I think it's just hard to imagine the transit system that is going to get people out of their cars, here in the Arkansas Valley in rural Colorado, where there are 7,000 people and 100,000 square miles of land or something like that. Right. So and the challenge, I think, is that these rural areas tend to be where these sorts of ecological problems are concentrated. Right here, this is where we have big herds of elk and antelope and deer. We've got mountain lions and black bears and so on, right? The rural places are the places where the wildlife tends to live, Santa Monica Mountains notwithstanding. And they also tend to be the places that where I think the car has America in its strongest grip, and where sort of automobility is like most intractable in some ways, right? So I think that it's these kinds of places, rural areas, where it's hard to get people out of their cars, and and there's lots of wildlife, where we really need to be investing a lot more in those wildlife crossings, which really do work. Giving animals opportunities to cross highways that are inevitably going to have traffic on them. And you mentioned the Infrastructure Act earlier. I mean, that Infrastructure Act had $350 million just for wildlife crossings,
Wow.
which is a good pot of money. Of course, it also had $110 billion for highways and bridges, right? So
okay, all right.
We're investing more money in these sorts of solutions for animals, but we're not investing nearly enough, right? So that's something that I would certainly do as transportation czar in your hypothetical future. Is I in urban areas, I dramatically increase transit options, and in rural areas, I'd tack another 0 or 2 onto the funding that we're allocating to wildlife crossings and habitat connectivity, and just give animals more options.
And how do you reckon with, on a personal level, you know all this about roads, and you still need to use them to get around. So how do you reckon with, when you're in your Subaru Crosstrek, how do you feel when you start the car every morning,
Yeah, well, fortunately, I work from home, and I live in a very walkable and bikeable little town. So I'm definitely able to minimize my driving, but I certainly do it, and I feel like shit, Adam. Thanks for asking. I don't feel great about it, but I also feel like, look, I'm at risk of abdicating personal responsibility. I live in this automotive society, right? We live in this country that's kind of oriented around the car, and it's in the book I really try hard to avoid blaming or shaming individual drivers for their decision to drive, right? I mean, it's sort of like, to me, it's sort of like climate change, right? It's like for a while, the climate movement was really focused on getting people to change their light bulbs, right? That was like the thing that was going to save us from climate change, was changing their light bulbs. And then, people realized that, oh, wait a second, first, that's just not nearly sufficient. And second, when you just kind of hector people about their light bulbs, you tend to turn them off, right? The real solutions are, holding fossil fuel companies accountable for their emissions, and, creating a decarbonized world, right? And I think that, road ecology problems kind of pose the same dilemma. The issue is not that, we individual consumers choose to drive. It's that we live in a world that doesn't give us many other options besides driving, and that's really the answer, is to create a world in which getting in the car every day is not the only rational option for a consumer.
God, I want to live in that world, and thank you for bringing us a vision of it. And the book is incredible. It's called Crossings: How Road Ecology is Shaping the Future of the Planet. You can get it at our special bookshop at factuallypod.com/books. And when you do, you'll be supporting not just this show, but your local bookstore. Ben, where can people find your work other than that?
Yeah, my personal website is bengoldfarb.com, and I am perpetually on Twitter, so hit me up there too.
Ben, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been incredible.
Thanks a lot, Adam, and thanks for not driving. I really admire that. I respect you.
Well, thanks for handling my good-natured ribbing about the owl. We'll all grieve later. Thanks for coming on.
Appreciate it.
Well, thank you once again to Ben for coming on the show. If you loved that conversation as much as I did, consider picking up a copy of his book at factuallypod.com/books. And please consider supporting this show on Patreon. $5 a month gets you every episode of the show ad-free. For $15 a month, I will read your name at the end of this podcast and at the end of my YouTube video monologues. Most recently, I want to thank Michael Frasco and Alex Sull. Thank you so much for your patronage. Head to patreon.com/Adam Conover to join them and support this show and keep it free for everybody. I want to thank my producers, Sam Roudman and Tony Wilson, everybody here at HeadGum for making this show possible. You can find me online at Adam Conover. All my stand-up tickets and tour dates are available there too. And I'm at Adam Conover, wherever you get your social media. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on Factually.
That was a HeadGum podcast.